everyone. Welcome to another episode of Unqualified Experts. I'm your host, Braden Gardner.
Shane, your corrupt overlord.
And today we thought we'd switch gears a little bit and talk about some of our favorite NES games.
Old school.
Get some of that nostalgia going.
Alrighty, well, kind of the way I made my list of some of my favorites is I'm skipping the ones that we all know are great games. Like, look, you can make the argument Super Mario 3 might be one of the best games ever made. Everybody loves the Zeldas. Everyone who loves shooters played the Contras. I feel like everything that's been said about those games has been said. So they're cool, they're great, we acknowledge you. But let's get excited about the more interesting ones that maybe you missed the first time through or never quite got around to playing. And so that's kind of what I looked at with my list. How did you focus on yours?
For mine, it was more a matter of personal attachment. I wasn't as worried about what games were the greats or what weren't, but just hold personal places in my heart for great memories playing with siblings growing up, and just overall excellent gameplay that still holds up even today.
Yeah, and the one thing I did like about the original Nintendo is you make a list of your favorite games, and what jumped out to me was how different the games could be. It wasn't like all shooters or all RPGs. I mean, there was a lot of crap during the original Nintendo era, but you could also find so many just random gems, because it really was the Wild West of game making in the beginning.
Absolutely. I mean, you had all of these different companies who were published basically through Nintendo, and you had the standard gray cartridges, and then you have these independent rogues out there in the 8-bit Wild West.
Tengen
with their black cartridges. There were blue cartridges, pink cartridges, weirdly shaped cartridges. As long as it fit in the Nintendo, it was fine, but it was such a Wild West type environment that literally nothing was standardized outside of what Nintendo put out.
Yeah. And so, would you like to jump off with your list first, or shall I?
I can start with mine. I think both of us have an honorable mention before we actually get into what our top 5 favorites are that was just close enough to the list that we felt it was worth bringing up, but didn't necessarily merit a top 5 in its own right.
Yep. My honorable mention was, speaking of Tengen, RBI Baseball for one reason. Fernando Venezuela. If I had a baseball in my hand, possibly by the magic of editing, and you were him, you could throw it that way, and you would see it come in screen and hit him in the head a few seconds later. Anyone who played that game knows how hilariously ridiculous it was. And just because of that, it was just great. It was unintentionally trolling before that was a thing back in the 80s. So RBI Baseball, especially because of Fernando Venezuela, very forgotten all-pro pitcher, you're my honorable mention.
And I don't have a lot of experience with this specific game, but I did make sure to get a little time in with it before we started recording. And part of what I love about it is the control that you have over the pitches, and the fact that I'm all but certain this is the game that is in the second Darby episode for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, where they're literally wagering souls over a game of basically NES baseball, and it's amazing. So I have to give props for that pick on the random pop culture reference there too. Or anime reference, whichever. JoJo's got roots in both, so... my honorable mention is probably the most mainstream title I'm going to talk about today. It is part of a very beloved franchise that basically was one of many that started on the Nintendo and is still seeing new games come out in its franchise even today. And that's the Legend of Zelda series. It's a great series, and others like Mario, Castlevania, Mega Man all have games that have come out recently or within the last decade to add to their legacy. But the second installment in the series, Zelda 2: The Adventures of Link, is kind of its own unique creature even among that franchise.
Yeah.
It blends top-down exploration, side-scrolling action-adventure, and even RPG elements all into one game. And it was so different from how the first Zelda operated, where it was top-down exploration, collect the treasures, get the pieces of the Triforce, defeat Ganon. This one's more, you're exploring castles, you're finding periodic items, but their benefits are largely continuous, and you go out and you buy spells from different mages throughout the world as you're traveling to help you get into the final castle and deal with the final boss, and then the after final boss, which is a shadow version of yourself.
Shadow Link.
Shadow Link is...
How many times can you get a boss down to 1 health before he murders you and ends all your dreams? Answer, 147 and counting in my case.
I've beaten Shadow Link a few times. I empathize, because that fight sucks.
I timed it right. No, I didn't.
Alright, well, I think that gets the honorable mentions out of the way. So, Shane, what's your number 5 pick?
Alrighty. Well, 5, a lot of people miss this one, and I'm kind of dating myself, but that's okay. We have the old school gamers here. Spy versus Spy. So whether you actually read Mad Magazine or saw the sketches from Mad TV, you know, the first few seasons where it was really good. Really underrated person versus person game. Entertaining, has the classic cartoon characters of the white spy versus the black spy. And you just go about trying to kill each other, whether it's CPU or you had the early split screen person versus person. You had guns, you had weapons, but by far and away, the most fun was using the comic book effects to kill each other. Put a spring inside a wardrobe that would then fling another spy across the room. Electrocute the carpet. Put a trap by the door. There were just so many ways to make a room really, really nasty with someone chasing you. My brother and I used to play this endlessly, just putting traps in each room, trying to work our way around to each other, and on some of those small maps, you knew every single room was trapped. You just weren't sure how. And it's a ridiculously simple game, but it's ridiculously fun. We put in so many hours going against each other. There was skill, but there's also sometimes dumb luck, which is good when there's a skill difference between players, and it was just entertaining. It was, in my opinion, kind of ahead of its time of what you would want future shooters and other person versus person games to be. And it just slipped under the radar of a lot of people, but a little comic book entertainment meets a little bit of 1v1 shooter, and it's great. It's my number 5. I have a feeling I would still enjoy it to some extent to this day. Plus, the spy laugh is just great when you kill the other one.
It's true. And having dusted this off relatively recently myself, the gameplay does hold up. If you don't know what you're looking for, it doesn't give you a lot of direction. So there's going to be some trial and error if you're new to the game, but it obviously holds up today and was popular enough to merit a wide array of ports across a different array of consoles and computer systems.
So yeah, you get past the original NES learning curve of here's the game, figure it out, and you've got a nice little gem there. And perfect for one-on-one playing, in my opinion. Alrighty, sir. What is your number 5 then?
Well, speaking of games that have 2-player modes but don't necessarily handle them very well, my number 5 pick is a classic ported from the arcade, and it's Tengen's iteration of Gauntlet.
Oh, yeah.
This game is a ton of fun, and I've never beaten it. You basically start off, you pick your class, whether you're going to go Warrior, Valkyrie, Wizard, or Elf. Usually the correct answer is Elf.
Elf.
And you are off basically exploring up to 100 rooms in this game where you're fighting monsters, collecting treasures, solving puzzles, and avoiding traps, trying to find the exit to get out. There are multiple ways you can go about that as you start to progress through the game. There's secret exits, there are extra treasure rooms that you can go into to refill your health gauge, and you need to be careful about how you spend your keys and your bombs.
Oh, yeah.
Because if you're not, you can end up at points where you're not able to get to a key piece of information. Most often, you're going to find that in the rooms that have a little question mark on them, where you need to get a piece of the password to get into the vault at level 100. is if you don't collect all of those clues, you die when you reach that stage and you're not finishing the game.
Yeah, and I will kind of double up on that. I have never beat that game either, but it's one of those that it was classic. It was everywhere. People played in the arcade all the time where you could do more than 2 players. The NES version of it was entertaining if you didn't know what you wanted to play, but you wanted some good old fantasy hack and slash. You just played Gauntlet. You knew you weren't going to beat the game, but you were going to actually enjoy it, and it was always good for that.
Absolutely. My primary complaints with it are that the password system doesn't let you start beyond level 79 when you're getting in, and the 2-player for it is atrocious because you share the same screen, so you have to be very coordinated if you're playing with a partner.
Or they're stuck, and you're stuck.
And there's nothing you can do about it. Or the infamous teleporters that don't follow controller inputs. Or the invisible walls when you get to level 60 or so. There's plenty of unfair garbage as you get into that game later, but it doesn't deter from the fun you'll have.
Speaking of unfair garbage and unfair difficulty level, that was a perfect segue for my number 4.
Oh, good.
Deadly Towers.
Oh, jeez.
Appropriate response. There is no game that so many gamers from the NES loved and hated so much with equal passion, and for good reason. The way I put it is, it's an incredibly in-depth world. It's frustratingly, aggravatingly hard. It is unbalanced, and it is strangely addictive. It was very different from games that day. You are the hero with all the low hit points and terrible garbage adventuring equipment that starts with. You kill enemies, you level up. Sounds simple, but you have to make your way through some bosses and dungeons, and there is no guidance for what you're up against. You walk in a dungeon, it might be a simple 20-roomer with basic enemies, or it might be one that is going to murder your face off in the first 2 seconds, and you have no way of knowing which one it is until you're in there. And healing in the game, you could technically get hearts, but man, they were scarce. So, Deadly Towers, the thing I did like about, though, is it was so rewarding every single time you got a little bit further just because the difficulty level was that screwed up. Even the earliest bosses you run into, you're used to beating a level 1 boss, whatever game you're playing. In this game, you might have died to the level 1 boss 10, 12, 13 times. You might have misstepped and fell off a cliff. You might have gotten hit a couple of times by questionable what the hell moments that then left you with too little energy to even have a hope in that fight. So you rush into a dungeon hoping to find some hearts and upgrades, and then you probably got your face murdered off. But those rare times you did make a little bit of progress, it became that much more rewarding. It is unbalanced. There's a lot of stuff that does not hold up today, but you would keep coming back from the challenge. There was something oddly addictive to it, and I'd argue it's kind of like an early version of Dark Souls in a way. It's like, you die some more, you die again, you die some more. What the hell? How did I die that time? But there was something about it that made you want to keep coming back and playing. And for that reason, Deadly Towers was one that got frequent rentals in my family, and it's a game that is on my favorite list of NES games. And I never came close to beating it.
Yeah, the last time I played that game, I walked into a room, was injured, shoved back through the door I came in, into another enemy in the next room, who shoved me back through the door into the enemy in the other room, and I instantly died for daring to go in a door.
That is a Deadly Towers death through and through.
So ridiculous.
Oh, well, good times.
Sure. My number 4, speaking of good times, this is a game that is a classic and is one that I played a lot growing up and even through college. And what is there really to say about Ms. Pac-Man that hasn't already been said? Like,
classic.
It's a classic game. Mm-hmm. It's another entry from Tengen's catalog. And they did an amazing job with this iteration on the NES. You have a wide variety of maps to choose from, excellent 2-player options. You have weird maps that you can go to, and you can continue up to 3 times after game overs once you get past map 7. So you can truly explore kind of what is out there, and you don't necessarily have to start each game at level 1 over and over and over again, which is really cool, especially on the strange maps where you have the weird things that you collect instead of fruit, like milkshakes or ice cream or glass slippers or other miscellaneous things. And part of why I enjoyed this one so much, not just playing it growing up, I actually beat this game on the cartridge when I was in college. I actually got to the end of the game, to the last map that they put in. Turns out there are 32 maps in this game.
I didn't know there was even technically an ending for that game.
I didn't either. But there absolutely is, and I found it.
Kudos. Yeah, it just... What more is there to say? Some arcade games are classics when they're ported into console, and that is definitely one of them. And that's one that my brother and I also played quite a bit. Nice challenge, a lot of fun. If anyone knows why 3 of the ghost names rhymed and then there's Clyde, please let me know in the comments, because I've always wondered why it's just Clyde. I can't help but to think he was picked on in ghost school.
And
it's a Clyde, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of feel like there's something there that just didn't translate.
So, well, outstanding. So number 3, and this is one I remember Braden laughing at and then enjoying the game as he tried it out when I brought this up on the list. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't care. I loved the movie as a kid. It is one of those guilty pleasures I still enjoy. With Morgan Freeman and Kevin Costner, and I'm sure there were others I should remember, but I don't. So, there's a classic tradition of making games after popular movies and TV shows, and 99% of them back in the day were garbage. This game was a gem. It was a shining exception to all of that. It's one of the very few games where there's a clear A to Z progression. You beat the game, you beat the game. There's not side quests. It's not an open world RPG. But despite that, I never owned this game. I rented it 3 or 4 times despite the fact I already beat it. Because I just enjoyed it so much, I was happy to do another full playthrough again. And that really speaks to how fun the experience with it was. It's one of those where the game was challenging. It had interesting enemies. It had good movements. Very good writing for an NES game. Good music, good character development. It actually, even as a kid, it got you invested into the plot, into the game story. And for the time, really cool battles and setups. Kind of a little bit of a blend of an RPG and a story game, and it did a lot of things in an interesting way that I just haven't seen copied. Definitely not back then, and very rarely since. Good music, challenging, good writing, and the biggest thing to me was, I think so many of the reason other games failed based on sort of like, oh, it's an Indiana Jones game, and you got a whip and you're jumping to platform, but it just wasn't anything. This game, it is a story. You go from point A, you get invested early with the first characters. Spoiler alert, you lose some. Of course, in fairness, if you haven't seen the movie after 30 years, you kind of deserve to have a spoiler. Just saying. But the game invests in making itself a storyline, and point A to point Z. So you're actually invested, you're actually moving along. It's not made of random mechanics. And it's a solid game. It really does hold up, and it delivers a really fun experience, especially for the NES system.
For sure. It's got elements of the point-and-click adventure genre to kind of manage your items on the map, but you don't necessarily have to use that. You can just hit the action button and pick up something that you find on the ground, which is super nice. It's a lot more forgiving in that than most other point-and-click adventure games, which I'll be talking about one here in just a moment. But it also, like Shane said, it's got a good story. The action is on point. It's not just top-down combat on the map. You can actually end up in a 2D fight scene where you're side-scrolling and trying to actually fight an enemy who is attacking at intervals, and you need to find their openings and go in to stab them with your sword.
Or dodge the boar that is 4 times the size of a human being.
Or that. So yeah, it blends a lot of genres really well, and you get some of the classic RPG elements too. And it also manages inventory, kind of how a lot of games back then did. The one that's one of the more famous ones for having each person have their own inventory is Earthbound. And this game manages your inventory fairly similarly, but does a fairly good job of making sure that getting to what you need or handing it off isn't clunky or stupid, which is greatly appreciated because a lot of games on the NES failed those benchmarks miserably.
And that's what I remember it was a smooth playing experience, and that was part of what made it so enjoyable. And so, even if you're doubtful, if you're an NES old school game fan, I highly recommend it. You won't be sorry.
Agreed. So, my point-and-click adventure entry for my list is actually one among a series of games that had its start on the Mac. You had Deja Vu, you had Uninvited, and then my personal favorite of the ports to the NES, Shadowgate. You get whisked off to a castle. You have to go stop an evil sorcerer from summoning a behemoth.
That sounds like bad news.
That's it. That's the tweet. You're dropped off in front of the door and left to your own devices to go in and start exploring. Once you're inside, you need to keep an eye on your torches. If your torches go out before you get a new one lit, you die. If you find a puzzle or an enemy and you touch the wrong thing or use the wrong item on it, you die. If you don't survey the room or decide you're going to be gung-ho about crossing bridges or spelunking down random holes in the floor,
you lose your paycheck. And then you die.
And then you die. And half the fun of this game is finding just all of the creative ways you can kill yourself. Getting to where you need to go. The other half is actually playing the game through and solving the puzzles and finding where all of the different items go, many of which actually aren't used for anything. And then you also have an excellent chiptune soundtrack to kind of lend credence to the creepy vibe of this abandoned castle with all manner of classic monsters scattered throughout it, as well as an array of hazards that have fairly obvious and some have not so obvious means of killing you.
And I think two things that stand out about that game is, one, whenever you have great mood music from an 8-bit system, hats off to the talented people who pull that off. That is amazingly difficult, and when it's done really well, you notice. And this is one of those games where you notice that. The other is, to me, it's beautiful to have a red herring game. In so many RPGs, you get an item, you keep it, because someday you're going to use it for something. In fact, you can pick up items that just, no, it's going to kill you every time you try to use it because it's the wrong thing. It's kind of a delightful twist on a method of gameplay that many people probably came to the game expecting.
For sure.
Well, and since we're talking about kind of RPG mode, in my opinion, this one is one of my favorite games because so many people have never even heard of it, and I actually think it's one of the more underrated RPGs in video game history. That's not saying it will stand up to the top ones, but no one knows about this game, and in my opinion, it should be one we all talk about for some of the originals, and that's Crystallis.
Oh, yeah.
And it's one of those, didn't get a lot of press, didn't get a lot of attention back in the day, but it is such a good game. True RPG, you wake up in a cave, you come out of the ice, you can't remember your name. The first people you meet are kind of strangely accepting of this weird amnesia caveman who just shows up, and you just kind of go from there. There's a lot of open world, a lot of mission and RPG elements, but also just an excellent storyline. The writing was so far ahead of most games of its time. You have individual characters, you have wise men you need to find. As you level up and get better gear, you unlock more gifts. You have to prove yourself. And to me, one of the interesting things with the characters in the story was it was actually heart-moving. It's one of those where if you've played the game, you get to the moment everyone who's played this game has known where things turn badly and you weren't expecting it and your character goes into a rage. And you feel that rage of the character. You feel the anger, you feel the betrayal. Like, you are ready to kill everything in your path in that game while the character is showing that emotion. You really tune into the story at a high level. And that is hard to do with any game, much less one that was working with the restrictions of the NES system. And so for me, it was great writing. It was such satisfying gameplay. The fights made sense. The level up system made sense. It was just so well put together in so many ways. And outstanding storyline.
Great storyline, good music, beautiful biomes,
Yep.
really tight controls, and yeah, this is probably one of the closer takes to a 3D top-down type environment because you have to navigate around mountains and across tundra and plains and forests, and it's all the cardinal directions are there for you to go and do what you're going to do. And as you progress through the plot points of the story, you find upgrades to your magic that make your different elemental attacks more powerful as you go along. And all of them are just incredibly satisfying.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's a deeply satisfying story. You'll actually get invested. There's no part of the game that sticks out as being a black mark or clunky. It's just such a well put together game that really deserves way more love than it's gotten in the past. So, always a big Crystalis fan. I even jump back and replay it once every few years just to remember. And, 30 years later, it holds up. It is a good, solid RPG game.
Agreed. And my number 2 entry also falls in the list of games that I go back and play periodically because it is probably one of the best in the platforming genre for the NES that doesn't get nearly enough praises sung about it. And that's the original Wizards and Warriors.
Classic.
One of Rare's early pieces, which makes sense considering the gameplay is excellent, with a dash of some of the NES level frustrating, because you have to be on point with your platforming skills. Basically, you're playing as Kuros, who is an Excalibur-style knight, and you're basically trying to stop the evil wizard Malkiel from doing whatever with the kidnapped princess of Elrond. And you're just dropped in a forest and sent on your way. The different levels of the game are laid out in such a way that they definitely reward exploration. You want to make sure that you're exploring not just side to side, you want to make sure you're going indoors, exploring vertically, searching for different colored keys on the map, which can be used to open specially colored doors that match them, or, more importantly, treasure chests, which can have anything from gems, which are used as points in the game basically, to magic items, to upgrades to your equipment, like the ability to throw swords or axes. All of it's just super helpful toward defeating the bosses at the end of each map, and then ultimately winding up at the castle, which is one of the most aggravating vertical jumping challenges in any NES game that I enjoy. But if you have the Potion of Levitation, it helps considerably.
There's a Potion of Levitation.
Uh-huh. Oh, I've done it without too. It's not fun. Don't do that to yourself.
Well, that warning was 20 years too late, but that being said, it's classic game. I'll argue there were 2 dashes of NES frustration versus 1, but challenging, wonderful, really well put together. The controls react very well, which is important if you're going to have the side-to-side and the up and down, which you do in that game. Deeply satisfying when you discover a secret room, when you get that extra key, when you move along the levels. It's just one of those truly high-quality games out there, but I do have to do this as an English major with History Lit. Excalibur-style knight. Excalibur is the name of the sword, my friend.
I know, but tell that to Wikipedia.
I'm not dealing with them. Anyway, but wonderful game on the list. It's not your traditional RPG. It has the fantasy elements. It is very much kind of the side scroller, the up and down, the battles, but it's a very satisfying gameplay. It takes a lot of skill, a lot of challenge, and you feel like you've accomplished something once you got through it.
And Unlimited continues, so you have the opportunity to do so.
Yes, that was a good call on their part.
Yeah, I wish they'd kept that call in the sequel.
So, can I get a drum roll for my number 1 then?
Sure.
All right. And this really may be my favorite Nintendo game of all time, Bubble Bobble.
Oh, yeah.
And there are a lot of people who are hearing that wonderfully relaxing theme song in their head on loop again that we can't play because of trademark reasons. And there are a lot of people staring at the camera wondering what the heck I just said. So Bubble Bobble is an incredibly satisfying game where you are twin dinosaurs Bub and Bob, because originality. And they're dinosaurs who beat their enemies by blowing bubbles, trapping them in the bubbles, and popping the bubbles. At which point the enemies become delicious fruit and other bonuses. This is just one of those where it's a delightful... It looks like a kid's game. It is. It is delightful, though. It is an absolutely delightful game. Easy controls. Very simple. You go level to level. You're trying to get through all of them to the end of the game. Fantastic two-player game where you can just bond with other people. The controls are simple, but they're relatively... you could do some complex moves once you get them down, especially going with two players. And this one where just each level is pretty. You have the fun music in the background. You can play it with your 5-year-old sister and have a blast. You can play it with your brother who's your age and have a blast. My parents got into this game because it was just adorable. It was a way to spend some time with Mom. And so it was one of the few games where the entire family could play it. We enjoyed it. And each level would just give you this little bit of experience. You just wanted to make sure to get done in time so the white ghost whale didn't show up and Ahab the heck out of your face, basically. And basically there is nothing bad I have to say about this game. It is one, in a single word, it's delightful, all caps. It's one of those you look at and I can't explain why it's so great, but if you've played it for just a little bit, it's addictive, it's fun, it's relaxing, it has so many things going for it. Except for that bleep out level 57. If you play the game, you know what I'm talking about. That still haunts me in my dreams. That is the stupidest level ever, and I will not forgive the designers ever. But aside from stupid 57, the worst number ever, it's a delightful game in every way, shape, and form.
Yeah, and going through, trying to put all the enemies in bubbles and then tag them to go collect extra points, go from level to level. The game gets increasingly more complex the further you go. It's delightful is absolutely the correct word to describe it.
Yeah, and it's just one of those where even if it doesn't seem like your type of game, give it a shot. It's fun, it's relaxing, it's different, and there is a reason we had so many hours of it during family playtime. It was fantastic. You always talk about wanting to find that gem of a game. That's just a random one, and for the NES, this was it. It is one of the best games ever on the NES system, in my opinion. And so that is my favorite one, due to the memories and the gameplay.
Yeah, and my favorite is a legend in its own right. A Guardian legend, to be specific.
I see what you did there.
No, the Guardian legend is one of those unsung greats that, honestly... It's criminal that we didn't get more games in that franchise. Like, it's great that we got more Marios and Zeldas, but the Guardian Legend was such a unique game compared to everything else that was out there. Great controls, a variety of different types of gameplay, an amazing slew of weapons that were all fun to use and satisfying to shoot into various enemies. Basically, you're playing a character who is going to the planet Naju, which is on course for Earth, and is full of hostile life forms, or aliens. And you have to basically deactivate 10 safety seals so that you can blow it up before it gets to Earth.
Sweet.
Pretty straightforward. You start off basically as a spaceship, shooting various debris and trying to get onto the planet. And then once you're there, it changes from a vertical scrolling shoot 'em up to more of a side-scrolling, non-linear exploration map, where you're able to go around and look for power-ups in special boxes scattered throughout different areas of the world. And as you break certain seals, you get access to keys, which open up access to other places you can go wander off and explore. And each of the corridors, there are 21 in total, you go back out from the top-down non-linear exploration back into the spaceship and fly down the corridor, not unlike you might see with Gradius. You can take all your weapons and toys in there and fight your way through a ton of obstacles, getting to the final boss, defeating them, getting that satisfying NES explosion, and then fly back out triumphant as the corridor explodes behind you. Truly one of the greats. I do recommend that you play it on an emulator rather than on the actual cartridge, though, because the password system is kind of the Achilles heel of that game. It's a 32-character system, much like a lot of the old NES password systems. But if you just want the old spaceship shooting and you don't want to go through the story of the game, you can just type in the password TGL and have access to all of the corridors back to back, basically. Which is also cool. It's got a little something for everybody.
Nice. And for full disclosure, I never got around to playing this game because it wasn't available when I grew up. I have heard nothing but raving and glowing reviews from people who have played it. And so that's our list. Those are our favorite games from the NES of that bygone era. So which ones do you guys love? Were you shoot 'em ups like Commando? Did you have an RPG we haven't heard of? Is there a game you can't believe we didn't mention? Do you have a personal favorite that no one ever seems to talk about? Put them below in the comments. We'd love to hear your takes. What were the ones that just really stuck out for you? Why did the game work for you? Why didn't it? And we'd love to hear your stories. So please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, good gaming.
Good gaming.
If you like what you just saw, please support us by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more great gaming content.